going to take a little different take on talking about IPT, or insulin potentiated low dose chemotherapy. Everybody talks about the mechanism of action, and that's all good and worth discussing. But here we're going to actually dive into a little bit different information. So here's a beautiful picture, as you can see, of Brio Medical, where we are. And yes, it looks like that every minute of every hour of every day. Who we are here at Brio, we are a holistic integrative cancer healing center. We are bringing together the evidence to really focus and maximize a holistic approach to integrative medicine. We're going to bring together things that science shows that works, whether they're holistic, whether they're integrative. It's about results, but it's about healing the body as much as we can. As you can see there, just some examples of some of the therapies that we use for our patients. And we have patients that come to us domestically from all over the world. All types of cancers, stage 4 to stage 1. Don't really like to use the word stage because it just evokes fear. But the point is, we deal with advanced cancers and cancers that are mostly recurrent and widespread. We're here in the beautiful valley of Scottsdale, Arizona, where it is 75 degrees Fahrenheit every day of the year. So for those of you who love it, you'll love it here in August. Just kidding. No, it's fine. It's dry. It's a dry heat. So who am I? Well, I've been in the integrative movement since 2006. And so really cut my teeth in hormones. And then as you evolve into that process, you really start to get in cancer. So I've been here treating cancer now exclusively in an integrative holistic approach for over almost 5 years now. I am a board certified medical doctor, and I'm also a board certified medical homeopath here in the state of Arizona. So it allows me to walk both sides of the fence, if you will. So let's talk a little bit about chemotherapy versus IPT, a tale of two wars. And I found this quote really interesting. A hospital alone shows what war is. Now, it shows the aftermath of war, but in many ways, war has moved from the battlefield to the hospital. And when one looks at chemotherapy as a treatment for cancer, it starts to make sense. So chemotherapy as a treatment really was born out of war. It was a concept of going to war, and the concept that we see in the hospitals today in treatment of cancer is all the collateral damage that you would typically see on the battlefield. It had its origin with a gentleman by the name of Paul Ehrlich, E-H-R-L-I-C-H. He began the process of using chemicals for the treatment of syphilis. And so this is really the origin of use of chemicals to treat disease. This then transformed into the early 20th century with Fritz Haber, who was considered the father of chemical warfare. And he initiated what was called the Chemist's War of World War I in April 22nd, 1915. And so he was intimately involved in the launch of the first battlefield use of chemicals in warfare. And he was actually referred to as Dr. Death. Now, he did win a Nobel Prize of Biochemistry in 1918 for his invention of the Haber-Bosch process for the creation of ammonia. But he really is Dr. Death. And he actually has a really famous quote that says, "Death is death no matter how you inflict it." So, but World War I was not the origin of chemotherapy. It really was a process by which it transitioned into World War II. So modern day chemotherapy as a treatment originated actually in World War II, and it began with actually a German air raid on Allied ships in Italy in 1943. And they called this a little Pearl Harbor. And basically, records here are not something that are commonly well known, but what we were dealing with here was a lot of chemical warfare, mustard gas bombs that were in the harbor in ships, and Germany bombed the Allied ships there, and they were there as a part of war preparation, though the Geneva Protocol of 1925 prohibited it. And basically, from that standpoint, there were some soldiers that were exposed to this, and they discovered that this may actually have benefit for these soldiers that had that never developed tumors. And so that is the process by which chemotherapy came from the battlefield into the medical field. So it's really born out of war. So when you look at this next picture right here, you know, war destroys, it obliterates, it's ruination, and war begets more war. Once war starts, it seems to never end. Now we focus on that as it relates to actual warfare, but we never think about that as it relates to other aspects of war, because it's not always on the battlefront with guns and cannons and missiles. Here, as it relates to the war on cancer, which was declared by Nixon in 1971, the battlefront is the body, and the collateral damage is also the body. So what we're looking at here is just the collateral damage of war in a World War I setting. But in essence, if you look at that, it's kind of a picture of the same type of war, but on the body. And again, you know, Hippocrates, considered the father of Western medicine, said, hey, we got to first do no harm. If we're doing harm, that needs to be something that we reconsider, because our responsibility is to the healing potential of the patient. As I mentioned so often, the word physician in Hebrew, Raphae, means healer. So our goal as a physician is to heal. And when you look at the concept of war, its only purpose is really to do one thing: death and destruction. So if we go to war on cancer, we go to war on the body, we're providing death and destruction, not just to the tumor, but to the rest of the body. And this picture, again, just gives you evidence of that. So if we have a treatment strategy that is causing this devastating effect, collateral damage on the body, here it's a city, you know, that is something that needs to be reconsidered. So when you look at war on cancer, it's really done three things. It's developed a massive medical industrial complex to wage war. It's created a massive list of casualties and you know, impaired individuals, but it's created a massive power source that we're dealing with today. So why do we need a second opinion on chemotherapy and cancer? I don't know that's necessarily a second opinion. We need a review of how successful are we being? Because when you look at the war on cancer, the narrative is that it's going well, but I would tell you that the actual data behind it is it's not going as well as we'd like to think. Cancer is the second leading cause of death globally. It's responsible, according to the World Health Organization, for approximately 9.6 million deaths. That's in 2018. 18.1 million new cases in 2018, again, according to the same World Health Organization. When you look at the development of cancer cases worldwide, it's 1 in 5 men and 1 in 6 women worldwide will develop cancer during their lifetime. Now, 1 in 8 men and 1 in 11 women will die from this cancer or this disease. But when you translate that to the US, what you're actually finding is a very different and more worrisome picture, is that 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will be diagnosed with cancer, and 1 in 5 compared to the 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 worldwide. So a much higher cancer rate here in the US compared to the rest of the world. And we'll get into why that is in a second. And when you look at the economic impact, we focus on deaths, and rightly so, but the economic impact of cancer is enormous. In 2010, an estimated $1.16 trillion was spent on cancer, or the impact. That's 19% ahead of number 2, which is cardiovascular disease. More than that, we're seeing cancer in younger ages. We're seeing more resistant incidences of cancer. And that's not even to mention the impact of the 2019 COVID pandemic and what that's going to bring, both direct and indirect. So what we were promised in 1971 was to go into war on cancer. Now we're in an indefinite, forever war, it seems like, and we're really not getting the results I think that patients should demand and doctors should demand. One of the interesting things I think that people look at is they think that, well, cancer is not the #1 cause of mortality. You know, this phrase, the new normal, it's a phrase that I think most of us would just rather go out and just puke when we hear that. And it's just a means to detract. But most people are not aware that in the United States, at least according to 2010, so 12 years ago, there were 21 states where cancer was the #1 cause of mortality in adults over cardiovascular disease. So 12 years ago, 21 states, cancer was the #1 killer in adults. Now that began in 1993 with Alaska. So this is not just some new trend. And when you look back in the 70s and 80s, you saw a very similar process called obesity. And they noticed the trends. And so what they tried to do is they tried to redefine it as a new normal. And so in a very similar manner, we're seeing that same kind of process bear fruit, where as the numbers increase, as the rates of cancer increase, as the mortality increases, there's going to be an attempt to redefine what is normal as it relates to cancer mortality. So here's just I thought a really interesting graphic from the LA Times, really trying to help us better understand the narrative that's being set, showing that the number of cancer deaths increasing from 1950s to 2010. But when you look at the number of heart deaths, you see that declining there. Oh, there's the second slide's not there. Let me see if I can go back. There we go. The second slide is not there, unfortunately. What it shows is it actually shows in the same CDC numbers, the annual rates of cancer deaths from 1999 to 2016 declining, but at the same time, the annual number of cancer deaths from 1999 to 2016 inclining. So, how can you have the annual rates of cancer deaths declining, yet the annual number of case deaths over the same time frame increase? And again, it's just this combative behavior or attempt to control the narrative and the message that we're not winning the war on cancer, and thus we need a change in perspective. So again, 1971, President Nixon declared the war on cancer. And so what I want to do here is provide a little bit of an update. So again, in review, chemotherapy, an approach of a lot of how we attack cancer, if you will, to use another war term, is out of war. And you see that in t-shirts, you see that in everything. Go to war on cancer, fight cancer, kill cancer. It's all a war mentality. It began in the disease department. It transferred to the war department with Dr. Death. It transferred to the cancer department via Colonel Cornelius Dusty Rhodes, gotta love that name. And he basically brought in some people you may have heard of, Alfred P. Sloan and Charles F. Kettering of Sloan and Kettering. And they endowed this institute to bring basically chemotherapy from the disease department to the war department, now to the cancer department. Now it permeates all aspects of the cultural department, where now we recognize that, hey, chemotherapy is the dominant means to treat cancer. So it permeates all aspects of culture. It permeates all aspects of marketing. I mean, just watch any, TV show or ad, or football program or sports, and you're going to see people dancing on the beach with butterflies and all kinds of stuff. And then they're talking about some new chemo drug that's going to make you lose all your legs and limbs. So when we look at data, when we look at evidence, what we have to say is not what does the narrative or message or marketing show, but what is the data saying? And this was a study called the PURE study, Pure Urban and Rural Epidemiologic Study. And what they did is they looked at 3 different groups of countries across the world. They looked at high income, middle income, and low income. And what they found may surprise some of you and may shock you otherwise. They found that cancer was the greater cause of death, more so than cardiovascular disease, in 10 countries: Belgium, Denmark, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Portugal, Slovenia, Spain, and the United Kingdom, as well as 2 that were not in the EU, Norway and Israel. So here, what we saw in these high income countries, and even in the high end of the middle income, the #1 cause of death in adults is cancer. not cardiovascular disease. That correlates with what we saw in the slide I showed you in the states, 2010, 21 states. More so in this pure or prospective cohort study, they found that cancer is responsible for twice as many deaths as cardiovascular disease in these high-income countries. Cancer is a disease of lifestyle. It's a disease of high income. And so that process is why we're seeing the narrative be debunked that we're winning this war on cancer, because actually we're not winning this war on cancer, and we need to recognize that to be able to pivot and make a change. And in fact, one of the authors in the study, I think, has this really important quote. So we're seeing a new transition in epidemiology as it relates to cause of death. That no longer is it heart disease, but cancer is a leading cause of death in high-income countries. So are we winning this war on cancer? No. And it's going to be something that requires us to recognize that data and then be able to move and pivot on that. So here's a loaded question that I think most would think they know and recognize the answer to as it relates to chemotherapy, born out of war into the cancer department and medical department. Does full dose to toxicity use of chemotherapy in the treatment of cancer work? Oh, sure, it kills cancer, but it kills everything else too. And that's the imagery of the collateral damage on the battlefront. But here the battlefront's our body. This answer may seem obvious that it does do this, but the evidence points to not so obvious an answer of an area that we need to be concerned about. First, does chemotherapy work? So let's answer that question. Well, here's a study published in 2005, okay? 17 years ago, if I got my math right, or 17 years ago. Yeah, this study looked at 22 cancer types and found a 5-year survival benefit from adjuvant chemotherapy in only 13 of 22 types of cancer that they looked at. But what's interesting in that is only 3 of those 13, so only 3 of the 13 of the 22 did the 5-year survival benefit reach 10%. Let me repeat that. Only 3 of the 22 types of cancer did adjuvant chemo provide a 5-year survival benefit that reached 10%. And in fact, if you look at that 2.3 and 2.1%, that's the overall 5-year survival benefit. 2.3% was actually in Australia and 2.1 was in the US. So it was a study conducted in both countries simultaneously. And a quote from one of the authors in the study actually said, "It is clear that cytotoxic chemotherapy only makes a minor contribution to cancer survival. Even in the most chemo-responsive cancer types followed in this study, the improvement in 5-year survival was only 14%. So let's look at the #1 cancer in the world, breast cancer. 5-year survival benefit from adjuvant chemotherapy was only 3.5%. Can you imagine getting on a flight and your pilot getting on and say, "Welcome, we're going to be traveling to Tampa Bay today. I hope you enjoy the flight. Looks like it's going to be a smooth flight. Welcome. No longer do you need to wear masks, but we have a 3.5% chance of getting there on time, but really we have a 3.5% chance of getting there at all." I don't think there's going to be too many people that are going to be hanging out on that airplane to see if that prediction comes true. But yet, it's a mainstay in what we do in the treatment of cancer, and it's something that needs to be revisited. So again, I'm big on data, and this is just a kind of a transition slide as we start to take a deeper dive here. It's a great study looking at how chemotherapy causes metastasis. Metastasis is the medical term for the spread of cancer. Sounds counterintuitive, but I'm going to show you how. This study, and there's many others, it's entitled Chemotherapy Exacerbated Breast Cancer Metastasis, a Paradox Explained by Dysregulated Adaptive Response. Now, this is important to understand. Not only do we know that full-dose chemotherapy can cause metastasis, it can shrink a primary tumor, but it makes it spread. Now, you may go, well, that's good because it shrunk the primary tumor. But if it makes it spread, When cancer spreads, that is the cause of 90% of morbidity and mortality associated with cancer. So in an essence, we're not just cutting our nose off to spite our face, we're really cutting off our head to spite our face, because we're taking a situation that is helpful to one that's almost untreatable with the metastatic capacity when we spread it. So how do we know that? How do we understand how cancer goes to be from something that's stationary to something that spreads? Because again, that's where 90% of morbidity and mortality is associated. Well, we understand many of the mechanisms involved, but I think it's important here to understand this is not sequential. So this is not A to B to C to D or 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. This is a process that's really happening at one time. When cancer invades, it is sending out circulating tumor cells. It is a process that happens almost all at the same time. You get altered cellular metabolism, you get mitochondrial damage, you're getting genetic changes in expression, you're getting internal disrupted cellular signaling that promote growth, you get areas of hypoxia, and you get the building up of these blood vessels called angiogenesis, you get lymphogenesis, which are lymphatics. As a process of the altered metabolism, you get acidic changes in the tumor microenvironment. This recruits immune cells to the tumor microenvironment that then turns the immune system on the immune system, and you suppress the immune system. That allows the cancer to escape the immune system, the cancer to physically escape what's called intravasation and disseminate via circulating tumor cells out to distant sites, carry what's called hypoxic memory, which is its function is behaving as if it's living in a hypoxic environment, but it no longer is, and thus landing at a distant site, extravasating in and developing a new tumor site called metastasis. We have a good, solid understanding of the components here, but understand we're going to learn more. So how and why is this important? Well, chemotherapy, full dose chemotherapy, plays a significant role in chemotherapy-induced metastatic spread. How? Chemotherapy changes the tumor microenvironment. The tumor microenvironment is the capacity whereby the tumor, no longer just a solid ball of cells, but it exists in an interaction with the body. So there's kind of this gray area. It's called the tumor microenvironment. A lot of different cells that exist there, but chemotherapy changes the tumor microenvironment in a way that makes it more favorable to spread. Chemotherapy, this is full dose now, promotes epithelial to mesenchymal transition. Now, this is a process by which these are two different types of cells. The chemotherapy will induce a cell that's more immobile, so it's not mobile, that's epithelial, to one that is mobile, that's mesenchymal. So if you think about that, going from immobile to mobile, that's not very good when you're talking about cancer, and that's one of the mechanisms by which chemo will spread it. Chemotherapy promotes physical cancer cell escape. So cancer cells have to physically escape the tumor, but they also have to physically escape the immune system. That is immune system escape. And chemotherapy promotes that. In fact, chemotherapy will recruit the immune system to it, will turn and morph these macrophages, what are called M2 type macrophages, and then use these against the immune system. So if you look at it from a developmental perspective, it's actually quite clever. It's using our defenses against our defenses. Chemotherapy increases circulating tumor cells. Now, this is a very inefficient process, but nonetheless, the more circulating tumor cells you get out there in the body, the more chance there is for the development of them landing at a culture-developed site for metastatic spread. Chemotherapy also, get this, promotes distant environments that are favorable for metastasis. So chemotherapy is actually, it's promoting and culturing the soil, if you will. It's actually called the seed and soil theory. It's no longer a theory, but it's not just increasing the release of tumor cells. It's not just helping it escape the immune system. It's actually culturing the sites, whether it's the liver, whether it's the lungs, whether it's the brain, whether it's the bones, so that that soil is more favorable to a tumor cell landing, surviving, and thriving, all from full dose chemotherapy. So chemotherapy has been shown to increase local recurrence, regrowth, immune dysfunction and suppression, as I mentioned, causing secondary cancers, promoting chemo resistance in a variety of different ways, promoting cancer stem cell activity, which is the backup we want no part of, but most importantly here, promoting the metastatic spread of cancer. Just wanted to re-highlight this again because here in just a second, there'll be some links that you can look at to actually go in and dive into the studies. It's not just that there's one study. It's not just that there's multiple, but there are multiple upon multiple upon multiple describing this process, describing the different chemo agents and how this process occurs. So here's that one study I mentioned. It's a great read. So if you got insomnia, trust me, this will cure it. But so what it does is this chemotherapy is changing the tumor microenvironment and making it favorable. Again, increasing the physical escape, the immune escape, and it's doing it via different cells called what are called TMEMs, tumor macrophages of epithelial metastasis. But in a process of what it's doing is it's changing this environment so that the immune system no longer does its job. This has been shown with paclitaxel, doxorubicin, Gemzar, gemcitabine. These are major chemo agents. Now, this is full dose, so it's important to understand that. But what this is doing is it's changing the environment so that the cancer spreads. It escapes and spreads. So the very treatment that is designed to destroy a tumor is the very treatment that has the unintended effect of spreading it. More so, get this, the full dose chemo will change that tumor microenvironment to promote what's called M2 macrophage polarization, where these immune cells that come in there, they morph into these immune cells that favor cancer development. That then favors a lot of the metabolic shift that we see in cancer. So these M2 macrophages that full dose chemotherapy will promote, it promotes lactate production. Lactate production is a byproduct of aerobic glycolysis. That is that altered metabolism we see in cancer. Lactic acid is a byproduct of that, amongst many other things. And that lactic acid is pumped outside of the cancer cell into the environment around that. That creates an acidic environment, not the whole body, but in the tumor microenvironment immediately around the tumor. And that creates a buffer. That creates a buffer for the immune system to keep the immune system away, but it's the acidic nature. And full dose chemo is doing that, and that helps to spread. So what we need is we need the data to help us to break through the narrative, the message that supports the system, because we need to support the patients. Our job is to the patient. We're advocates for the patients. So we need a different, better, more targeted therapy to attack cancer, one that will attack the cancer but not spread the cancer. And that's what IPT, or low-dose metronomic chemo, or IPTLD as it may call, a safer, smarter, better, targeted use of chemotherapy. I mean, chemotherapy will kill cancer cells, but let's use it safer, smarter, better. That is a holistic approach to the use of this process. What I jokingly say, it's like you have a headache, you come into the doctor and he says, well, let's give you this 2x4 upside the head. And the patient, and then the doctor asks the patient, well, how's your headache? Well, my headache's fine, but my brains are all over the floor. So what did we really do there? What we want to do is we want to target the tumor, but not spread the body. We want to target the tumor, not destroy the immune system. And a safer, smarter, better approach, a holistic approach, an innovative approach will help us to do that. So again, going back to the father of Western medicine, because he did so much with so little. First, do no harm. Make a habit of two things: to help patients, or at least to do no harm. And I hope I've been able to present how, going through that history to where we are today, are we helping? Yeah, kind of. But are we doing harm? Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Most people see the physical evidence of that, both direct. The metastasis is direct, but it's more of a delayed indirect effect. So again, getting back to the message, the narrative here, which is to support this process, is that a well thought out story doesn't need to resemble real life. It's that life is meant to resemble a well-crafted story or a narrative. The data doesn't support the well-crafted story here. More, we're forgetting the reality. And it says, this other quote from Roger Zelensky said, "Man forgets reality and remembers words." Well, according to what Hippocrates said, first to help and then second to do no harm, I think we're forgetting reality and we're forgetting words. So why is IPT or IPTLD or low dose metronomic chemo, why is it different? Well, the evidence shows it's quite different. It actually was developed for that purpose. And so when you look on this slide here in the right lower column, you see there's a link there, and that'll take you to where I've put together some studies just for your reading, and it'll really show you that, hey, there's not just a little bit of evidence there, there is strong evidence for the use of low dose metronomic chemo. This is actually recognized by oncology. Now, why are general oncologists not doing this more? That's a question I think you should ask them, but that's one that's hard to really not have a good answer for. So when you look at what IPTLD does, it specifically targets the process of angiogenesis. This is the abnormal tortuous blood supply that cancer needs to support its just crazy growth potential with nutrients, but also to remove waste. Full dose chemo doesn't target that at all. So low dose targets angiogenesis. IPTLD increases drug uptake, and so it increases chemotherapy uptake by cancer. And this is where most people will focus on when they talk about IPT. They talk about insulin, the insulin receptor affinity, its cross connectivity with insulin growth factor, and how this is going to increase. There was actually a study that showed that insulin increased the uptake in cytotoxicity of methotrexate in cancer cells by 10,000-fold. So it's improving the delivery, it's improving the sensitivity of the cancer cells to the chemotherapy. So it's increasing their susceptibility to the chemotherapy killing it, but it's a lower dose yet increased chemosensitivity and susceptibility. And it still triggers cancer cell death, process called apoptosis. So it's not coming in and just destroying the DNA of the cancer cell and that's just wiping it out, which is kind of what the full dose chemo does, and that's why it has such collateral damage. But it's actually triggering a developing process that triggers cell death in a variety of different ways, one of which is apoptosis. More, it actually inhibits cancer growth. So full dose chemo will inhibit cancer growth, but do so by destroying the immune system. Low dose will inhibit cancer growth via a variety of different mechanisms, but it won't destroy the immune system. And understand, the best answer to cancer is never get it, obviously. The second best answer to cancer is get rid of it and never get it back. That's the immune system. The immune system's job is to protect the body against all invaders, both foreign and domestic. Cancer falls into the domestic category. Full dose chemo destroys the immune system. They've actually done studies looking at cancer cells and the immune system. The cancer cells start to recover from that chemotherapy destruction within 7 days, whereas the immune system can take longer than 30. You get yourself into a perpetual immune suppression, and that's why cancer spreads. Low-dose chemo does not do that. In fact, low-dose chemo stimulates the immune system. It's actually called immunomodulatory. It stimulates the immune system. It will stimulate dendritic cells. It will stimulate natural killer cells and cytotoxic T lymphocytes. And I'll show you a video of that in a second. It reduces the mobility of the cancer cells. Anytime you reduce the mobility, hereby insulin potentiated low-dose chemotherapy, you're going to prevent or reduce the incidence of metastasis. Finally, it reduces circulating tumor cells. Circulating tumor cells are the satellite cells being released out there. They are the mechanism, though inefficient, of how cancer cells release out these satellite cells that will eventually form a new home that we call a new primary tumor, and thus a metastatic spread, thus stage 4, quote unquote. And thus, in many cases, the way conventional medicine looks at stage 4, they said, hey, now this situation is not, quote unquote, curable. The way I look at it, God's the only one that can cure. Our job is to tap into the body's healing mechanisms to try to get the body to do its job. So this is just, I thought this would be a really good video to end with, because it really shows you that this is going to show that not natural killer cell, it's going to show a natural killer cell attacking a cancer cell. So if we come in with full dose chemo and we destroy the immune system, we're destroying this defense mechanism. But if we come in with low dose targeted metronomic chemotherapy, we support the immune system.
The green cell you see here is a killer T cell of the immune system, which is attacking the cancerous red and blue cell. You can tell when the killer cell has recognized the cancer cell because the two dots move around and contact the target. The killer cell then spreads out over the cancerous cell. Passing the video through a filter makes the killer cell look yellow and allows us to really see how it focuses on the cancer cell. These killer T cells are constantly hunting down dangerous cells throughout the body and destroying them.
So this important defense mechanism that's critical to how our body protects us against cancer is destroyed, is disrupted, and in many cases never to recover and never to return. But yet, by targeting it, by lowering the dose, not only can we increase the sensitivity of the cancer to the treatment, but we can actually boost the immune system and not destroy it. Healing doesn't mean you destroy on your way to healing. That's really kind of absurd. Healing is a process by working with the body, working with the immune system to help it do its job, strengthen it, support it, but not destroy it in the process. So thank you for the time. I hope it's been helpful. Again, a different take on low dose chemo, not really diving into what most people will approach, but I wanted to show you how the data is really supporting a different direction than what the narrative is showing, and thus justifying a means to making a change required to helping patients with cancer. So give us a call here at Brio Medical. You'll be able to talk to some of our great patient consultants there, and they'll be able to let you know a little bit about who we are, what we do, and how we can help you on your wellness journey to maximize your healing with this thing called cancer. So thank you very much. What I want to do right now is just kind of open up for any questions that anybody may have. It seems we already got a few in there. Okay, first one says, some in the ketogenic camp believe that IPT can result in increased relapse after remissions. Thoughts? Well, when you look at the data on full dose chemo and you look at the data on low dose chemo and its impact on the immune system. Now understand that low dose metronomic chemo has a broad range of definition, anywhere between 10 to 30% of the full dose. The higher you go in that percentage, the more full dose like your treatment effects become, thus more immune destructive. The lower dose you go, in fact, the literature even describes what's called an ultra low dose, but the lower dose you go, it becomes more immunomodulatory. It becomes more immunostimulating. So as it relates to the dosing, talking about ketogenic camp, I think what you have to understand is, what's the dosing actually being described here? Is it more 30%? Is it more 10%? Because this is not something that we've seen that it increases relapse and remission. So that's not something that, I've seen in my clinical experience. Next question, can you comment on low dose immunotherapy? And do you offer that at Brio? Of course we do. This is something that we don't want to destroy the immune system. We want to destroy the cancer. What I tell our patients is we have two objectives here. One is to destroy the tumor, target it, of course, but we want to heal the body. In many ways, cancer develops because an adaptation to survive within an inhospitable environment within the body. So by eliminating the tumor, so you could just cut it out, but if you don't change the environment, that's how it recurs. And so if we then add treatment in that destroys the immune system, we're just propagating the means by which this process will recur and spread. When you say low dose chemo, low dose, are you referring to chemo pills that are taken every day? Good question. It can be that. It can be IV, but it can also be oral low dose metronomic chemo. So it's something that both of those terms, both of those approaches do apply here. It's just simply taking a lower dose, and the metronome from band in middle school. It's allowing us to increase the frequency of the treatment. And that process really improves the treatment of cancer as it supports the immune system. Let's see. Oh, you're welcome. They just said, thank you. You bet. So what time is it? Oh, got through a little fast there. What is Thursday? So. Anybody have any other questions as it relates to low dose metronomic chemo, metastasis? Because, we could talk for hours upon hours upon hours about the details of how this process occurs, but I don't want to put you to sleep just yet. One chat here. What type of chemosensitive testing do you do best to select the chemo agents? Great question. There's a lot of different approaches by which you can do that. We choose to use some oncologist out of California, and there's actually a test here in the Valley. But this allows us to more directly test the cells, whether it's via a biopsy or not. Could be via fluid from the belly or from the lung, but it could be from a biopsy, but it could be from a previous biopsy too. So it's not that you have to get a new one, but this allows us to specifically look at what agents are going to target specifically this cancer type because of its genomic expression and its behavior. We are in the arena, we are in the world of targeted, customized therapy. That doesn't just mean it's words, it's reality. And so when we employ this targeted testing, it allows us to target the treatment, not just with insulin, not with the low dose chemo, but also because of its genomic expression and behavior. Do we do the RGCC test? No, here we do not. We do not. Okay. Well, great. Hope this has been insightful, enlightening, and this recording will be sent out sometime within the next week or so. So I encourage you to revisit back around, regroup, and check it out and share it with any friends, anybody that you think may benefit from this information and knowledge, whether it be friends, loved ones, those with cancer, or those being touched by it. So I hope you all have a great evening and a fantastic weekend. Take care now.